The other day I was talking to Jack, and he was trying to convince me that he could travel through time. I didn't believe him. I said, "You're going to have to prove it somehow." And he said, "Well, why don't I bring something back from the past that'll make you believe?" I said, "Well, go ahead. See what you can bring back that will convince me." And this is what he came back with. On a recent visit with Moses and Rachel, they tried to convince me that there might be a raccoon in their shed, so we went down to check it out. You'll never guess what we found.
Alright, I've been hearing some weird noises from this, Moses. Good thinking. Jack!
While Jack and Bones were on vacation, they went to Mesa Verde National Park and they shot this one video to prove that they'd been there, I guess. My grandson Moses asked me to make a video about how I can take a video I shot at his house and other houses and then put Jack and Bones in them. He didn't ask me how I made Jack or Bones or how I get them to move, but how I put him in a video when he really wasn't there. So I'm going to show a quick overview of how it was done in the 3 videos you just saw, since all 3 were done differently. Let's start with the video of the boys driving the Flintstones car. The process is done in 3 basic steps. 1. Shoot all the scenes. 2. Composite those scenes. And 3. Render the project. When I say shoot all the scenes, I mean just that. My live scenes are usually shot with a camera in my iPhone. I also shoot Jack and Bones doing their thing, but the camera I use is a virtual camera that exists only in the software on my computer. Once we shoot all the scenes, we have several videos. Now all those shots or videos need to be put together into one video. This is step 2, which is called compositing. All these videos are layered, one on top of the other, with the live footage always on the bottom, and it is called the backplate. Then on top of that, there is the animation and the shadows. These 3 are the 3 I always have in my Jack videos. Then there can be other layers, like multiple animations, masks, and even special effects. The video of Grandma getting Bones in the hole in the church parking lot had all these layers. In fact, I had to film Jack and Bones separate because the amount of light it took to show Bones properly had washed out Jack. Plus I needed to do masking, and of course the brilliant hole flash was definitely a special effect. But we are not going to dissect the video of Grandma in the parking lot, but the 3 videos we just watched. Let's have a little fun by doing some compositing. We will use the video or backplate of the Flintstones car and add on top of that the video of Jack standing in the Mesa Verde doorway. So here we have plugged in the backplate movie into the composite node, but we don't see anything because it's just for compositing. We will need to add a viewer node so we can see what we are doing. Now that we can see what we are doing, let's layer on top of the backplate the Jack video. Now this is not really a video, but an image sequence, meaning we have 422 individual images in a PNG format, so we can have transparency. But together they will act like a video. So now we have Jack with everything else being transparent. As you can see here, we cannot plug both the composite or viewer nodes in at the same time, so we will have to add an alpha over node to combine them, so we can preserve the transparency. Now that we have done the compositing, the next step is what? If you said rendering, you're right. To save us a little time, I've already rendered this video. As I start the video, watch Jack's feet. What the heck is going on here? What is causing Jack to slide all over the place? I created a little animation to illustrate what's going on. Here we see that the iPhone is moving all over the place, but the virtual camera is staying stationary. That is our problem. So how can I solve this problem? You might be thinking that I should put the iPhone on a tripod to keep it still, and the problem would be solved. And that would indeed solve it. But believe it or not, I am purposely moving the camera around so I can solve another problem. So if I need the camera to move, then how do I solve this problem before I go to the other problem? Well, I'm going to have to synchronize the two cameras as we see here. We will deal with how to do the synchronization in just a minute, but first we will need to talk about the other problem I just mentioned. Looking at this still of the street, can you guess what the other problem might be? Maybe this picture will give you a hint. If you said perspective, you're right. But 3D perspective is quite a bit different than drawing in perspective on a 2D picture, because we will not only be rendering the 3D objects as you see here against a 2D backplate, but those 3D objects will be moving through 3D space. And again, it must be done against a 2D backplate, and those objects must cast shadows that mesh perfectly into the 2D backplate. So how are we going to determine that 3D perspective? With the concept of parallax. Parallax is how objects appear to move in relation to one another from the point of view of the camera. In other words, it's like when you're in a car looking out the side window and the furthest objects in your view are moving or going by slower than the closer objects. It also considers how those objects move in relation to each other as you rotate the view, which is happening here when you stare or focus at any particular object as your location changes. So we need to find both how the location and the rotation of the camera change over time. As you watch this backplate video one more time, notice that I am moving it as much as possible without it looking too obvious, so as to get as much parallax effect as possible. So how are we going to get it all done? We are going to do it with motion tracking. Motion tracking is where you select different points or objects in your backplate and track them for every frame of the video. Here we will choose a leaf in the foreground and track it. Now that that is done, we will track something far off in the distance, like the corner of this window. Now that the window is tracked, let's compare them. Here we see the tracking line is half red and half blue. The red is where the tracking point was for the last 20 frames, and the blue is where the point is going to be for the next 20 frames. This first tracker has a nice gentle hump. Now let's look at the window tracker. Whoa, this is really different. It makes a loop and then goes off in a line to the side. You wouldn't think it would be that dramatic in just 40 frames, which is only about 1 1/3 second. Now that we have 2 trackers done, all we need to do is add about 6 dozen more, and we are done with the tracking. Next, we need to first set up the camera to do a camera solve, and then do the solve. Second, apply the tracker information to the 3D scene, and third, orient the camera and set both the X and the Y axes. The 3D scene is all set up. Let's scale up the 3D markers that were assigned their places by the camera solve of the trackers. The markers are what is called the point cloud. As we see here, they seem to move like the trackers on the backplate. But what is moving, the markers or the camera? Well, let's break out of camera view and look. Aha, we can see now that it's the camera that's moving. While we are out of camera view mode, let's look at the point cloud from the side. As we see here, the camera solve has created the perspective, or 3D space, and we are now able to add our 3D objects and check out how good the camera solve really was. Next, we will project the backplate onto the 3D scene to check the markers. Looks good to me. Let's scale down the markers and finally add our 3D objects. Well, it looks good to me, probably because I've done it so many times, but to you it may look like everything is floating above the street. In fact, you may be wondering why there is a ground plate under the car in the first place. Well, that is in fact really not the ground, but what is called a shadow catcher. Why do you think shadows might be important or necessary? Well, that's what connects the 3D object to the ground or to the other objects in the backplate. They are critical to making the video believable. A lot of people comment that the videos I make look real, but when I ask them what it is that makes them believable, they can't really put their finger on it. But let me assure you that it's the shadows, reflections, and correct lighting that makes them so realistic. This is the nose setup for the shadow catcher. This is a color node, and we see that it's black. This node is transparent like glass. And these other nodes are used to tell the plane to be black where the shadow is being cast and transparent where there is no shadow. I control them with this slider. Let's render a frame with the correct settings. That looks pretty good. Now let's move the slider all the way to the right. And you can see how important the slider is at this setting. The plane is not completely transparent. What do you think is the factor that determines where the slider will have to be to have complete transparency? Let me give you a hint. What causes a shadow in the first place? If you said light, you hit it right on the head. Here we see we have the light and it's set as a sun. With a sun, I can set the direction and intensity of the shadow, just like it is in the real world. Well, we have returned to the compositing, and here we see the compositing nodes or layers for the final video. This one is the car and boys, and this is the shadow. And finally we will add the backplate, and we have completed the compositing. Now we will set up the computer to render the complete video, and we are done with this first video. Now that we know the basics, we can quickly go through the other two videos and see what problems I had to overcome. First off, I thought it was a great idea to have the kids open the shed door and there would be Jack sitting on a stump. Well, after I got the backplate in the computer, I was frustrated when I realized I didn't have enough uninterrupted areas in the video for me to track. First, the kids come running in from the side. Then the camera cuts off everything above the door. Then I was discouraged when I realized that over half the scene would be unavailable for tracking when the doors opened up. I nearly gave up on the project, but then I thought, there has to be a solution. So I got creative and tried something new. As I considered what I needed, it dawned on me that since Jack is just sitting still, perspective is not a real issue in this scene. Just the camera movement is a problem. So instead of tracking the whole backplate, I decided that only 2 trackers would be needed for this solution. So here are the 2 trackers. Next, I linked what are called empties to the trackers. Here are the 2 empties. Now the solution called for adding an armature to the empties. This end of the armature is parented to 1 tracker, and since it can't be parented to 2 objects, the other end of the armature is instead constrained to the other empty. Now the armature is moving with the empties. All I needed to do was parent Jack's armature to the other armature, and I should have solved the camera movement issue. As you can see, it works just fine. This solution is the opposite of the first video. In that one, we synchronized the 2 cameras, so the virtual camera is moving just like the iPhone. Here it is the whole 3D scene that is moving with the iPhone. But this solution added another problem. Jack is in the scene, floating in the air when he's supposed to be in the shed. I wrestled with the idea of using masks, but instead decided that there needed to be an easier answer. Well, the first part of the solution was so simple of an idea that I nearly didn't even see it. Let's see if you can figure it out. If you don't want to film something, what shouldn't you do? Did you guess it? Don't turn on the camera, right? It's too easy of a solution. Here the camera turns on, as you see, on frame 478. That's just as all of Jack comes into view. But that had its own problems. When I did a test render, Jack just popped into view. I was afraid that I was going to have to do the masking anyway, when I thought maybe I can solve this with lighting instead. And that solution did the trick. Here we can look at the scene from above, as well as watch the lighting properties on the side panel. As soon as the camera turns on, the light meter of the sun is set at 8%, and the sun is pointing at Jack from the side. As the door opens, the sun increases in intensity to 58%, and the sun turns 90 degrees to help slowly light the scene. I was so happy to solve this without doing any maskings, but I would not be able to get away without masking in the last video. So let's go ahead and check that one out. Now this last video is completely different than the first two in that the backplate is not a video, but a still photo that I took a few years ago at Mesa Verde. So right off, there will be no motion tracking in this one. What I wanted to do was put Jack in this doorway, but I saw a problem right off: the grass and the flower in front of the door. I knew the only solution to that would be to cut them out in Photoshop as a separate layer, as we see here. At this point, the video has 3 layers: the back plate, Jack just standing around acting like he's really happy to be alive, and finally the grass and flower that I cut out in Photoshop. The 4th and last layer is coming, but we can now go straight to the compositor and see what's going on. Let's start at the bottom, which is actually the top layer. What should it be? If you said the grass, you are correct. Then the next layer should be which one? If you said Jack, you're right again. But look, he's not behind the grass, and he's too small. So we need to add a couple of other nodes to correct these issues. One is a scale node to make him bigger, and a transform node to move him around. And then if we click on this alpha over node, we can see the 2 top layers together. And the 3rd layer, of course, is the back plate, which when we click on the last alpha over node, will composite all 3 together. But we have another problem. Jack is in front of the door, and we want him inside the building. How are we going to do that? Well, we are finally going to have to do some masking. Let's leave the compositor and open the movie clip editor. This funny looking thing here in the doorway is a mask. Its purpose is to tell the computer what we want to be seen and what we do not want to be seen. But it doesn't affect the backplate or other images like the grass, but only the 3D objects like Jack. You can see that it is made up of all these movable dots. The reason for this is so that you can change the shape and size of the mask if what you are masking is in a moving video backplate. You would need to make adjustments for every single frame of the movie. Now you can see why I wanted to come up with a non-mask solution to the opening doors in the last video. And now you know how Jack walked around the tree in the Black's yard. As we plug in just the mask into the viewer node, we see that it's just black and white. When Jack is over the white, we will see him. But when he is in the black area, he will be invisible. Now that all that is done, the next step is to render the video. After I had rendered the original, I decided to do a little more in post-production. What I did was open the video in another editor that we have not yet mentioned, the video sequencer. Here we see the completed video on the bottom track, and on top of that is a transform effect strip. As I click on the transform strip, you can see something appearing in the upper left. This is another editor called the graph editor. In it you can see a pinkish wavy line. What I have done is added two noise modifiers to the video. This pink one is on the X location axis. The wave indicates how much the video will move back and forth on the X-axis, which is going from side to side. The purple wave indicates how much the video will rotate back and forth from its center. So can you guess why I did this? I wanted it to look like all the other videos I had taken on my iPhone with my customary camera shake. Well, that is a basic explanation on how I did the last three videos, and I hope you may have learned something. Let's watch all three one last time. Bye-bye.
Alright, I've been hearing some weird noises from this. Good thinking. Jack!